a few years now, like post George Floyd, and there were all, speaking of changing minds and changing behaviors and everything, right? So I live in the corporate world and corporate media, and so there was a piece that came out recently that was talking about a lot of the DEI professionals that were hired getting laid off, as some of these early layoffs, and a lot of this being lip service and things sort of rolling back. And so how can we ensure that there's the current focus, where we were talking about race and racism, how do we keep that on track and try to make meaningful, lasting change rather than it becoming a trend that, is then phased out?
I was having this conversation with a couple of friends a few weeks ago. They were over for lunch, and we spent 4 hours sitting around my dining table talking about this kind of thing and alternately crying and laughing, right? Because some of it is just so demoralizing. But I think that the thing we sort of finally came to, let me back up on that. One of the things that we came to is that it was inevitable that this whole sort of reluctance to stay in this DEI work would happen. A, because it's hard work, and B, because once the attention is off of it, there's not really the motivation for people to keep doing it, in the corporate world. And if you have no direct investment in this happening, it's really easy to let it go to the side, because there's the rest of life, and life is busy and it's pressing, and there are all these things happening, and people get really caught up in their own lives, and we all do. And I think that what people with privilege, so, a lot of people who are white and have the privilege of not having to engage with racism in their lives as a regular thing, I think often they don't understand the cost to them of racism. Racism costs everybody. Its most direct cost, obviously, is to the people it's directed at, but it costs everybody. And if we were able to engage with it from that perspective, it would be more highly valued by the corporate world. It would be more highly valued by the educational world, and people would put more attention on it. Money follows what you value, and we're seeing what people value. And progress has been made, and some of it has slipped, but progress has been made. There are people who are aware of this whole challenge of becoming a society that is actively anti-racist, who were not aware of that before George Floyd in the same way. It just hadn't shown up on their radar. And so now we're in this position of just having to engage with the whole experience of race and racism in a direct way that we hadn't had to before. And it's just, it's different. It's just different.
As a white, cis, heterosexual male, what advice would you give me on being helpful but not annoying? Because it can be difficult sometimes as a white male to be an ally, because you're seen as a person that doesn't understand. And I agree, I don't, but I also care so much about it. And I sometimes feel like I can't express it as much because I feel like a faker or you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's difficult.
I think that the first thing that anyone can do when they're in a circumstance like that, where they care about something, but they also recognize that I'm in a pretty privileged position here, is to be curious. Ask questions of people and just say, I'm curious about this. My experience is limited and constrained by these particular circumstances, being white, male, cis, and I understand that your experience is really different. And I'm curious. And when I say that, I'm not asking you to have them be there to educate you. I'm simply saying, acknowledge that you don't know and that you're learning and that you're willing to be corrected if you make a mistake, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
all make mistakes. I
Yeah.
make mistakes. And also to just extend compassion on both sides, compassion for yourself, compassion for the person who's trying to learn something. You know, sometimes I think about it this way. All of us learn to walk, right? And, you know, all of us without disabilities learn to walk. We all fell down for many, many, many times before we got the walking right. And no one around us was going, oh, I can't believe you didn't get the walking right the first time. Nobody says that to a toddler. Nobody. And yet we will say to people who make a mistake about something like race, we'll just cancel them. How is that helpful? And I'm not talking about people who are deliberately being creeps. I'm
Yeah.
talking about people who genuinely made a mistake.
Yep.
We have to have a little more compassion, a little more grace for each other than that, or we get nowhere.
So be kind to each other, even at
And
the
ourselves.
expense of yourself.
But also to yourself, because we do make mistakes, and beating yourself up is not helpful.
Yeah.
It makes you less likely to engage in the process.